Jack had always believed that life was about balance. Work hard, play harder, and when the opportunity presented itself, fly first class. After months of grueling deadlines and sleepless nights, he finally decided to reward himself with a first-class ticket for his flight from New York to Los Angeles. It wasn't just a seat. It was a declaration, a symbol of triumph over corporate chaos, endless Zoom calls, and the soul-crushing monotony of microwave dinners. Jack wasn't just flying. He was soaring, literally and metaphorically. As he approached the gate, Jack felt like royalty. Sky priority lanes whisked him past the masses of economy passengers who shuffled along like zombies in search of coffee. He smirked inwardly as he imagined their envy. He was about to experience luxury at 30,000 feet. The promise of plush seats, gourmet meals, and legroom so vast it could host a yoga session had him practically skipping down the jet bridge. But as Jack stepped onto the plane, his dreams of grandeur collided headfirst with reality. There she was, Karen. Not just any Karen, this was the Karen. Middle-aged, dressed in leopard print leggings that screamed, "I'm here to make a statement," and perched smugly in his first-class seat like she owned the airline. Her oversized handbag spilled into the aisle, creating a barricade that rivaled TSA security checkpoints. Jack froze for a moment, unsure whether to laugh or cry. He had heard tales of Karens before, those mythical beings who thrived on entitlement and chaos, but he never thought he'd encounter one in the wild. "Excuse me," Jack began politely, his voice tinged with the optimism of someone who still believed in human decency. "I think you're sitting in my seat." Karen didn't even look up from her phone. Instead, she waved her hand dismissively as though swatting away an annoying fly. "Nope," she said curtly. "This is my seat." Jack blinked. Surely there was some mistake. Perhaps she misread her ticket or accidentally wandered into first class while chasing dreams of free champagne. He tried again, this time holding up his boarding pass like it was an ancient scroll containing undeniable proof of his rightful claim. "Actually," Jack said, his tone still diplomatic but now laced with determination, "this is 3A, and I have the boarding pass for it." Karen finally looked up, her eyes narrowing as if Jack had personally insulted her choice of leggings. "Listen," she snapped. "I'm a single mom traveling alone. I deserve the seat more than you do." Jack's jaw dropped. Was this some sort of social experiment? A hidden camera prank? He glanced around the cabin for support, but found only awkward stares from other passengers who clearly wanted no part in this unfolding drama. "Well," Jack replied slowly, choosing his words carefully to avoid escalating the situation just yet, "I'm sorry to hear that you're traveling alone, but I paid for this seat." Karen scoffed loudly enough to turn heads 3 rows back. "Oh, please," she said with theatrical flair. "You're young. You can survive in coach. I have back issues and need extra legroom." Jack resisted the urge to point out that Karen's back issues didn't seem to hinder her ability to haul a handbag large enough to smuggle contraband across international borders. Instead, he gestured toward the flight attendant who had just entered the cabin, a beacon of hope in this sea of absurdity. "Ma'am," Jack said firmly but politely as the flight attendant approached. "There seems to be some confusion about seating arrangements." Karen immediately launched into her monologue, a masterclass in weaponized victimhood. She claimed that she had been misled by the airline's website, accused Jack of being insensitive towards single mothers, and threatened to file a formal complaint if she wasn't allowed to stay in 3A. The flight attendant listened patiently before asking Karen for her boarding pass. After an agonizingly long pause filled with Karen's exaggerated size and muttered complaints about millennials ruining society, she finally produced her ticket, 28B. Jack couldn't help but chuckle internally. 28B wasn't even close to first class. It was practically in another zip code. "I'm sorry," the flight attendant said diplomatically but firmly, "but your ticket is for 28B in economy class." Karen's face turned redder than an overripe tomato as she sputtered indignantly. "Well," she huffed, "I should be in first class. This is discrimination." Jack raised an eyebrow. Discrimination? Against what? People who don't understand how seating assignments work. He decided it was time to fight fire with humor. "Karen," he said with mock sincerity. I completely understand your frustration. Flying coach can be tough. I've been there myself. But unfortunately, first-class seating isn't determined by moral superiority or back pain. It's determined by money. The cabin erupted into muffled laughter as Karen glared at him like he had just insulted her entire ancestry. The flight attendant tried once more to defuse the situation by offering Karen assistance, finding her assigned seat in economy class. But Karen wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. I demand an upgrade, she declared loudly enough for passengers 2 gates away to hear. I'll sue this airline for emotional distress. Jack couldn't resist anymore. Sarcasm bubbled up like champagne at a wedding toast. Emotional distress? He echoed incredulously. Karen, if emotional distress were grounds for upgrades, every passenger on this plane would be flying private jets. More laughter rippled through the cabin as Karen grabbed her handbag and stormed toward economy class, muttering something about how society had lost its values. As Jack settled into 3A, the rightful throne of his airborne kingdom, he couldn't help but savor the sweet taste of victory. Sure, he hadn't planned on starting his journey with a showdown worthy of reality TV drama, but sometimes life throws curveballs, and occasionally those curveballs come dressed in leopard print leggings. With Karen safely banished to economy class and peace restored to first class, Jack leaned back in his spacious seat and smiled contentedly. The flight attendant handed him a glass of champagne as if rewarding him for surviving what could only be described as the Battle of Seat 3A. Jack raised his glass in silent toast to luxury travel, comedic chaos, and most importantly, never underestimating the power of a well-timed joke when dealing with Karens at 30,000 feet. Jack watched Karen shuffle indignantly toward economy class, her leopard print leggings swishing with every dramatic step. He thought that was the end of it. Surely, no one could sustain that level of entitlement for an entire flight. But Jack underestimated Karen. She wasn't just any passenger. She was a crusader for self-appointed justice, and her battlefield was the narrow aisle of this Boeing 737. As Jack leaned back into his luxurious first-class seat, champagne in hand, he allowed himself a moment of peace. The leather seat cradled him like a supportive friend, and he could already feel the stress of the past few months melting away. But then, like a villain in a low-budget horror movie, Karen reappeared. "Excuse me," she barked, now standing directly in front of Jack's seat. Her voice carried the authority of someone who had once successfully returned a half-eaten sandwich to a deli and demanded a full refund. "I need to speak to you." Jack blinked up at her, confused. "Me?" he asked, gesturing to himself as though there might be another champagne-sipping passenger in 3A who had somehow wronged her. "Yes, you," Karen snapped. "I just spoke with the flight attendant, and she said I can't have the seat because you paid for it." Jack tilted his head slightly. "That's correct," he said slowly, unsure where this conversation was headed. Karen crossed her arms and leaned in closer, her perfume, a mix of lavender and passive aggression, wafting into Jack's personal space. "Well," she said, "I think you should give it to me anyway." Jack stared at her, dumbfounded. Was this woman serious? He glanced around at the other passengers in first class, hoping someone might jump in to confirm that he wasn't hallucinating. But they all avoided eye contact, clearly unwilling to engage with the chaos unfolding before them. Karen took his silence as an invitation to continue. "Look," she said, softening her tone in what she probably thought was a reasonable approach. "I'm a single mom. I've had a really hard year. Don't you think it's only fair that I get to enjoy the seat? You're young. You'll have plenty of chances to fly first class again." Jack couldn't help but laugh. A short, incredulous burst that escaped before he could stop it. "Fair?" he repeated, raising an eyebrow. "Karen, can I call you Karen? I don't think fairness has anything to do with this. I paid for this seat. You didn't." Karen's face twisted into a mask of righteous indignation. "Oh, so now you're gonna lecture me about money? Do you even know how hard it is to be a single mom? Do you have any idea what I've been through?" Jack sighed and set down his champagne glass carefully, like a man preparing for battle. "Karen," he said evenly, "I'm sorry you've had a tough year, truly. But do you know what I've been through? Months of working 16-hour days, eating instant ramen for dinner while staring at spreadsheets until my eyes bled, just so I could afford this one moment of peace. Karen opened her mouth to argue, but Jack held up a hand to stop her. And let's not forget, he added with a smirk, I'm also a single parent. That caught her off guard. She blinked at him, momentarily speechless. A rare and beautiful sight. You're what? She finally sputtered. That's right, Jack said smoothly. Single dad here. He reached into his wallet and pulled out a photo of his dog wearing sunglasses. A picture he always kept handy for moments like this. Karen squinted at the photo suspiciously. That's not the same thing, she stammered. Oh, Jack said innocently. Why not? My dog depends on me entirely for food, shelter, and emotional support. Sounds pretty similar to parenting if you ask me. The passengers around them chuckled quietly, emboldened by Jack's quick wit and Karen's increasingly flustered demeanor. Karen straightened up and pointed an accusatory finger at him. This isn't over, she hissed before storming back toward economy class once again. Jack shook his head and chuckled as he watched her retreating figure disappear down the aisle. He picked up his champagne glass and took a long sip, savoring the sweet taste of victory. But Karen wasn't done yet. About 15 minutes later, just as Jack was beginning to relax again, she returned with reinforcements. Another flight attendant who looked like she'd rather be anywhere else in the world than mediating this nonsense. Sir? The flight attendant began hesitantly, clearly trying to remain neutral despite Karen glaring daggers at her from behind. This passenger has raised some concerns about seating arrangements. Jack sighed deeply and set down his glass again. He turned to the flight attendant with an expression of weary patience that only someone who had dealt with corporate HR could master. Let me guess, he said dryly. She thinks she deserves my seat because she's had a hard year? The flight attendant looked uncomfortable but nodded slightly. Right? Jack said with a humorless laugh. He turned back to Karen and spread his arms wide in mock surrender. Okay, Karen, let's hear it. What exactly do you want from me? Karen stepped forward triumphantly as though she'd just won an argument on Facebook about gluten-free diets. I want you, she declared dramatically, to show some compassion. Jack stared at her for a long moment before bursting into laughter. A genuine belly laugh that echoed through the cabin. Compassion? He repeated between chuckles. Karen, compassion doesn't mean giving up something you've earned just because someone else demands it. The flight attendant coughed awkwardly but didn't intervene as Karen fumed silently beside her. Look, Jack continued more seriously now but still with an edge of sarcasm in his voice. If compassion means anything here today, it means respecting other people's boundaries, like their assigned seats. The passengers around them erupted into applause, not loud enough to draw attention from Coach but enough to make Karen flush bright red with embarrassment. Realizing she'd lost this battle, again, Karen muttered something unintelligible under her breath before retreating one final time toward economy class, her leopard print leggings swishing angrily behind her like banners of defeat. As peace finally settled over first class once more, and Jack returned triumphantly to his champagne, he couldn't help but marvel at how far some people would go just for the illusion of entitlement. And yet, there was something oddly satisfying about standing his ground against such absurdity, even if it did mean sacrificing 15 minutes of precious relaxation time along the way. Jack had just begun to settle into his first-class experience, feeling victorious after Karen's second retreat to economy class. The champagne was flowing, the seat reclined like a dream, and the in-flight entertainment promised hours of mindless distraction. But Jack should have known better. Karen wasn't the type to let things go. She was the embodiment of persistence, like a telemarketer who calls during dinner or a mosquito that refuses to be swatted. And she was about to make her grand return. It started with a commotion from the back of the plane. Jack could hear her voice rising above the hum of the engines, growing louder with each passing second. This is unacceptable, Karen screeched. I demand justice. The words echoed through the cabin, sending shivers down Jack's spine. Not because he was intimidated, but because he knew she was heading straight for him. Sure enough, Karen appeared moments later, marching down the aisle with the determination of someone who had just Googled how to win an argument and decided to try every tactic on the list. This time, she wasn't alone. She had recruited another passenger, a man who looked like he'd been dragged into her crusade against his will. He carried an expression that said, "I just wanted to read my book in peace." Karen stopped directly in front of Jack's seat, planting herself like a tree that refused to be uprooted. "This is him," she announced dramatically, pointing at Jack as though he were a suspect in a lineup. "This is the man who stole my seat." Jack sighed deeply, setting his champagne glass down for what felt like the 100th time that day. He looked up at Karen with an expression of exhausted disbelief. "Karen," he said slowly, "we've been over this." "No," Karen snapped, cutting him off before he could finish. "We haven't. You think you can just buy your way into first class and ignore people like me? Well, I've had enough. I'm standing up for all the single moms out there who deserve better." Jack blinked at her, momentarily stunned by her audacity. He glanced at the man beside her, Karen's reluctant ally, who shrugged apologetically as if to say, "I don't know how I got involved in this." "Karen," Jack said evenly, "I didn't steal your seat. I paid for it." Karen rolled her eyes so hard it was a wonder they didn't get stuck. "Oh, sure," she sneered. "You paid for it. Because people like you think money solves everything." Jack raised an eyebrow. "Well," he said with mock seriousness, "it does solve seating arrangements." The passengers around them chuckled quietly, emboldened by Jack's quick wit and Karen's increasingly flustered demeanor. Karen ignored them and turned to the flight attendant who had arrived on the scene once again, her expression now bordering on despair after dealing with Karen for what felt like an eternity. "This man," Karen declared loudly enough for half the plane to hear, "is harassing me." The flight attendant blinked at her in confusion. "Harassing you?" she repeated. "Yes," Karen insisted. "He's making me feel unsafe. I can't believe you're letting him sit here while I'm stuck back there in coach." Jack couldn't help but laugh, a short burst of incredulous amusement that escaped before he could stop it. "Karen," he said dryly, "I haven't even left my seat." "That doesn't matter," Karen shot back. "Your attitude is hostile. You're making this flight unbearable for me." Jack leaned back in his seat, crossing his arms as he studied her theatrics with mild fascination. He was beginning to wonder if Karen had missed her calling as a soap opera actress. The flight attendant cleared her throat awkwardly before addressing Karen again. "Ma'am," she said diplomatically but firmly, "this passenger hasn't done anything wrong. He's sitting in his assigned seat." Karen threw up her hands dramatically as though she were auditioning for a role in Shakespeare's King Lear. "Assigned seat? What does that even mean anymore? This whole system is broken." Jack couldn't resist anymore. Sarcasm bubbled up like champagne at a wedding toast. "Karen," he said with mock sincerity, "if you'd like to discuss systemic issues in airline seating policies, I suggest writing a strongly worded email to customer service instead of hijacking my flight experience." More laughter rippled through the cabin as Karen glared at him like he had just insulted her entire ancestry. But Karen wasn't done yet, not by a long shot. "I demand an upgrade," she declared loudly enough for passengers 2 gates away to hear. "I'll sue this airline for emotional distress." Jack tilted his head slightly as though considering her threat seriously for half a second before responding with deadpan humor. "Emotional distress? Karen, if emotional distress were grounds for upgrades on flights, every passenger on this plane would be flying private jets." The passengers around them erupted into applause, not loud enough to draw attention from Coach, but enough to make Karen flush bright red with embarrassment. Realizing she'd lost this battle, again, Karen muttered something unintelligible under her breath before retreating one final time toward economy class, her leopard print leggings swishing angrily behind her like banners of defeat. As peace finally settled over first class once more, and Jack returned triumphantly to his champagne, he couldn't help but marvel at how far some people would go just for illusion entitlement. Jack was just beginning to believe that his ordeal with Karen was finally over. She had retreated to the depths of economy class, presumably to stew in her own indignation or perhaps plot her next move. First class was peaceful once again. The faint clinking of champagne glasses and the hum of polite conversation creating a serene atmosphere. Jack leaned back in his seat, savoring the quiet triumph of standing his ground. But as anyone who's ever dealt with a Karen knows, their persistence rivals that of cockroaches in a nuclear apocalypse. The peace lasted all of 20 minutes. Suddenly, Jack noticed movement out of the corner of his eye. Karen was back. Again. This time, she wasn't alone. She had dragged the head flight attendant into her crusade, a woman whose expression suggested she'd rather be wrestling an alligator than dealing with Karen's theatrics. Behind them, a few passengers from economy class craned their necks to watch the unfolding drama, clearly hoping for some mid-flight entertainment. Karen stopped in front of Jack's seat, her arms crossed and her face set in a look of smug determination. She gestured toward him as though presenting evidence at a trial. "This is him," she said to the head flight attendant, her voice dripping with self-righteousness. "This is the man who's been harassing me." Jack blinked at her, utterly baffled. "Harassing you?" he repeated. "Karen, I haven't even spoken to you since you left." "That's not the point," Karen snapped, cutting him off before he could finish. "Your attitude is hostile. You've been glaring at me and making me feel unsafe." Jack raised an eyebrow. "Glaring at you? Karen, I've been watching the Office reruns on my screen for the past 20 minutes. Karen ignored him and turned to the head flight attendant with an exaggerated sigh. "I can't believe you're letting this man sit here while I'm stuck back there in coach," she said dramatically. "It's discrimination. I deserve this seat just as much as he does." The head flight attendant pinched the bridge of her nose like someone trying to stave off a migraine. "Ma'am," she said patiently, "this passenger hasn't done anything wrong. He's sitting in his assigned seat." Karen threw up her hands in exasperation. "Assigned seat? What does that even mean anymore? The whole system is broken. People like him think they can just buy their way into first class while people like me suffer." Jack couldn't help himself. Sarcasm bubbled up like carbonation in his champagne glass. "Karen," he said dryly, "that's literally how airline seating works." The passengers around them chuckled quietly, emboldened by Jack's quick wit and Karen's increasingly flustered demeanor. Karen ignored them and turned back to the head flight attendant with renewed determination. "I demand an upgrade," she declared loudly enough for half the plane to hear. The head flight attendant sighed deeply and gestured for Karen to follow her toward the galley area at the front of the plane. Jack watched them go with a mixture of relief and curiosity, wondering what fresh nonsense Karen was about to unleash. Several minutes passed before the head flight attendant returned alone, looking more exhausted than ever but also oddly triumphant. She approached Jack's seat with a small smile and leaned down to speak quietly. "Sir," she said, "I just wanted to let you know that we've resolved the situation." Jack tilted his head curiously. "Resolved?" he echoed. The flight attendant nodded. "We've informed Ms. Karen that if she continues to disrupt other passengers or refuses to return to her assigned seat in economy class, we'll have no choice but to remove her from the flight." Jack couldn't help but grin at this news. "And how did she take it?" The flight attendant hesitated for a moment before answering diplomatically. "Let's just say she wasn't thrilled." Jack laughed softly and raised his champagne glass in silent toast to the flight crew's patience and professionalism. But as satisfying as this resolution was, Jack wasn't quite ready to let Karen off the hook entirely. When Karen finally returned to economy class, her leopard print leggings swishing angrily behind her, Jack decided it was time for one last act of petty revenge. He flagged down another flight attendant and asked for a pen and paper. Then he wrote out a short note. "Dear Karen, thank you for making this flight so memorable. I'll be sure to tell everyone about your inspiring crusade for justice in airline seating arrangements. Best regards, Jack, Seat 3A." He folded the note neatly and handed it back to the flight attendant with instructions to deliver it discreetly to Karen once they landed. As Jack leaned back into his first-class seat one final time, he couldn't help but smile at how absurdly entertaining this whole ordeal had been. Sure, Dealing with Karen had been exhausting, but it had also provided him with enough material for countless dinner party stories. And as he sipped his champagne and watched the Office reruns on his screen once more, Jack felt a deep sense of satisfaction knowing that he'd stood his ground against entitlement and come out victorious. So here's the moral of the story. When life throws you a Karen at 30,000 feet, don't back down. Stand your ground, sip your champagne, and remember, sometimes revenge is best served with a side of humor. If you enjoyed this tale of airborne chaos and petty revenge, don't forget to like, share, comment below with your own Karen encounters, and subscribe for more hilarious stories.